Hello, everybody. Welcome to Conflict Resolution, Improving Professional Relationships. We are so happy that you chose our breakout session. But before we get started, we wanted to send a big thank you to Dr. Patty Matheny and her entire planning committee for all of their hard work in putting together and making this virtual conference a reality.
Hello, everybody. My name is Shannon Vogt, and I'm a program specialist with East Valley SELPA.
And I'm Klenske. I'm also a program specialist with East Valley SELPA.
We want to thank you for being here with us. You had a choice, and you chose to come spend the next hour or so with us. So we really appreciate it, and we appreciate and respect that your time is valuable. So whether you're an administrator, teacher, coordinator, program specialist, presenter, paraprofessional, parent, school psychologist, speech pathologist, occupational therapist, we want to give you a shout out and say thank you for being here and thank you for all that you do for your students. Today's objectives. Participants will learn the process of alternative dispute resolution, ADR, as it can be used in an IEP or solving everyday conflicts. Participants will acquire mindfulness strategies to solving conflicts and coming to agreement within a team setting. Participants will understand how having knowledge of ADR strategies can be useful in solving everyday conflicts between staff in the education setting. And participants will adopt a step-by-step approach to conflict to ensure positive student outcomes. So for our first objective, we have here participants will be able to define the process of alternative dispute resolution, ADR, as it can be used in an IEP and solving everyday conflicts. So what is alternative dispute resolution? It's an informal method of settling agreements. This process promotes strengthening relationships and open communication, which is solution-based. The main goal is to come up with a mutual agreeable outcome between all of the parties that are involved. And we're hoping to not get to the point where we're looking at including a judge. So when we're looking at education systems, when we're looking at districts, when we're looking at special education, we're really talking about families and district staff. So unfortunately, sometimes, and maybe you have been in these particular relationships and or IEP meetings where somehow, somewhere, something has gone wrong along the way. And so with the alternative dispute resolution, it's a way for hopefully all of the parties involved to sit down and try and come up with a solution to all of the problems that have already happened, and always kind of keeping in mind the student. And always looking at having a particular facilitator, and we'll talk more about that, but a person there that is non-biased, that is leading the group to find the right solution to the problems that have happened in the past. So we like to call some of the presenters that are here in this particular conference the superheroes of ADR. These are Jason Harper, Nina Meyerding, Greg Abel, Mark Perchin, and Carlo Rossi. So these are individuals who have really had their career in ADR. They may have their own private agencies. Marianne and myself have seen them. We've gone to the conferences. We've had training with them, And we really have learned many strategies from each and every one of these individuals. Looking at the individuals, if we look at Jason, he talks about culture and that it's a total accumulation of an identifiable group's beliefs, norms, activities, institutions, and communication patterns. So when we're coming to the table or we're coming to a meeting or a place to try and solve problems, we can't take away our culture. We can't take away other people's culture. We need to learn and grow and understand people's cultures. And Nina talks about power here, there, and everywhere. And when she talks about power, we know Nina as a powerhouse herself. She talks about power of preparation, power of the environment, power of good relationships, organization, pacing, collaboration, having resources. So she has that perspective for ADR. When we look at Greg Abel, he talks about difficult and crucial conversations and our relationship with conflict. So you know that if you are going into an ADR meeting, that there are going to be some difficult and crucial conversations. We are going to talk about the elephant in the room. And many people try and avoid those conversations. So he talks about strategies about how knowing that you're getting involved in those ahead of time and being prepared for those. Also, he discusses that you need to know how you are and what your relationship is with conflict prior to even getting involved in these other conversations with other people, so that you're aware of what you are doing, what your body language is doing, what your breathing is doing, what your communication is doing when you are involved in these particular meetings. Mark Perchin, he has a saying that it's let's be hard on the problem and gentle with each other. We have had a lot of training with Mark. He helped us come up with ground rules, agendas, and we'll see some other slides down further in our presentation of what Mark has helped us learn along the way. And Carlo Rossi, the importance of an IEP being a partnership. And really, it is a partnership. When you have a student or a child in a school district, you are going to have a partnership from the time that they are in preschool till the time that they graduate as a senior. That is a very long partnership. So if things go sour along the way, you really need to try and mend those relationships so that you can, move forward in that relationship, in that partnership for the student, for the child. No matter what superhero we're talking about, always, they recommend good questions equal good communication. So we have a few here. Again, kind of referencing Mark Perchin's consulting team. If we reflect on questions like, tell me more about that. I'm not sure I understand that part. Let me make sure I understand correctly. What would you like to see here today? Can you help me understand? What would it look like if it was, let me summarize what you just said. And these particular questions can really help us get to the bottom of what others are trying to say if they're not communicating very well themselves. So we always want to reflect on these questions and try to let them help us lead our conversations and lead and guide our meetings. When we're looking at ADR, typically what we see ADR for courts, school districts, obviously for us, corporations, medical groups, organizations, agencies, and even sometimes individuals. Those are our typical ADR processes that we see. The facilitator, I've already spoke about the facilitator just a little bit, but the facilitator is going to be a very important person in the ADR process. So the facilitator is going to be the planner, the leader, the generator. They're going to be the timekeeper. They're going to be the listener. That's the slide that we talked about, the questions. They're going to be using those types of questions to guide the entire team, to guide the entire group, to guide the conversation. They're going to adapt the meeting to whatever direction they feel is the best way. They're going to clarify with those questions. They're going to summarize with those questions, and they're going to validate all of the parties and all of the good work as they are making gains. Again, the role of the facilitator, clarifies the purpose of the meeting, validates the speakers, draws out information and feelings, listens intently, summarizes, supports all members equally. Again, that's that person that is non-biased. Sometimes it's not even a person from the school district, it's an outside member. We're going to take notes on the poster board or a whiteboard. The facilitator usually is not necessarily the one taking the notes, but guiding what goes onto the notes, because he or she is going to have a very large job of kind of staying focused, leading the meeting. So a lot of times the facilitator will ask one of the other team members to stand up and write some of the information on a whiteboard or a poster board, so that as you guys or the group is working through challenges, working through problem solving, all of that good work is going to be on a whiteboard, on a poster board. The facilitator is going to make sure that you're staying focused on the actual process. They're going to make sure that you're staying and keeping to the agenda. And if anything comes up that's outside of the agenda, they're going to make sure that that information gets placed on a poster board so that everybody's concerns and questions are heard and noted. And it's all up where everyone can see it. And it's very visual, and everybody can reflect around the room to the posters and really notice that work is being done. Good work is being done. Okay, we have objective number 2, and Mary Ann is here to talk to you about that.
Thank you, Shannon. So our second objective is participants will acquire mindfulness strategies to solving conflicts and coming to agreement within a team setting. Mindfulness, a mediator who promotes the importance of active listening but doesn't model that behavior through their own actions, is not practicing mindfully. So this is just really driving home the point that when Nina talks about the power of preparation, organization, all of these things are part of what we come to the table with when we're the acting facilitator. So if we don't have all of that together, if we cannot bring our centeredness to the meeting, then we're not really showing our team members exactly what kind of behavior is expected at these meetings. So what does that look like? Well, first of all, we want to start thinking that you may not be able to change your situation, but you can change your response to the situation. So, these meetings can become quite heated at times. As a facilitator, we have to make sure that everyone understands that how we respond is going to be more productive in a calm way versus if we're reacting in an angry, confrontive manner. So, awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non judgmentally, awareness of a stillness at your core. So, this is what mindfulness is. You really want to make sure that you stop, hear what each person is saying, kind of process that in your mind, and either at that point you're directing whoever is taking notes, you're restating and summarizing what people are saying, you're asking those questions that Shannon talked about earlier. You also want to trust and stay with the feelings of discomfort rather than trying to escape or analyze them. So we really want to make sure that everyone understands that, yes, this is difficult. And so we don't expect everyone to come into these meetings with, just, okay, this is all going to be great. There's tension, there's preconceived and pre experienced emotions, reactions. And so if we can kind of become comfortable with those and know that they are there, that we can start working towards solutions versus why am I feeling this way? Or, you know what, I'm going to think about something else. That's not the appropriate productive way in order to deal with it. So lastly, we want to open our attention to the present moment. Focus on our sensations. Concentrate on breathing. Um, Concentrating on breathing in just one area of the body. So, sometimes in stressful situations, we can almost forget to breathe. Some people might have very shallow breathing. Um, some people might sound like they're out of breath. What we want to do is slow down our breath, take deep breaths, notice it in your belly, in your chest, feeling the air coming out of your mouth. It sounds so corny, but it really works. And I have to think about there is a an ABC News national newscaster that was actually experiencing his first panic attack on camera for the whole country to see. And so he actually adopted mindfulness meditation in order to deal with that. And he's just feels like it's changed his life. So breathing is definitely, you always hear it, but it's definitely a start to get into this place of mindfulness. But when we're mindful, we become aware of the common themes and concerns between the parties, and we can then uncover the common ground. This is how we build trust. So if we can really be aware of what everyone is saying and how it's coming across, we're clarifying, summarizing, we can actually pull from that some of the common things that are going on between the two parties and use that to understand each other, and from there build that trust. I'll turn it over to Shannon.
Okay, thank you, Marianne. So now we are going to understand how having knowledge of ADR strategies can be useful in solving everyday conflicts between staff in the education setting. So let's take a look at what that looks like. What if we were able to take all the knowledge, strategies, and training and apply it to common conflict we face with our colleagues on a regular basis? So we're talking if we can take these wonderful strategies that we've learned from our gurus, our superheroes. We've already kind of introduced you to them in the beginning of our presentation. What if we could take some of these amazing tips and tricks and strategies and bring them to our teachers or our school site staff to allow them to use these strategies in those moments where conflict arises. so that students are not being affected by adult conflict. So let's see what that might look like. What are some common conflicts in the education setting? So when we brainstormed and talked about what are some common conflicts, we put together our experiences as program specialists at East Valley SELPA. Many times when we get referrals, we go into situations where there's all sorts of different things happening that we need to help brainstorm and solve. Sometimes there's misunderstanding between roles of teachers, paraprofessionals. Maybe speech pathologists are coming into the classroom, and what does that role look like? Maybe there's misinterpretation of what the job is. Not understanding expectations. Absolutely, that is a big one. And that can quite honestly cause conflict right away. Equity and workload definitely can cause animosity and problems. And then miscommunication can be huge. Miscommunication can happen anywhere at any time. I said that, but I really wasn't meaning that, or I meant that and I said this, and it really can cause conflict, and it really goes back to a lot of what our superheroes talk about, knowing your relationship with conflict and knowing your culture, knowing others' cultures, and understanding where, perspectives of others that you're working with. So what are some examples of conflict between two parties on a school campus? So what could that potentially look like? So there could be a conflict between an administrator and a teacher. There could be a conflict between a teacher and a teacher and paraprofessional, paraprofessional and paraprofessional, speech pathologist and teacher, and school psychologist and teacher. It just really depends on what the issues are. I know for myself, my background, I at one point had 5 paraprofessionals that I was in charge of, and that was a difficult task. I had students with behavior challenges, and I think that my adults had more of a behavior challenge than my students did at some points. Just because we're bringing 5 different personalities and myself into the mix, and you never kind of knew what was going to happen or what people's reactions were, what happened on the way to work, what happened the night before, and what they're kind of bringing into the classroom. So we had to have a lot of meetings to try and sort through some of the main conflicts and the main issues. So I definitely was reflecting on my background with adults, and sharing my space with adults, and having other professionals come into my space as well. When faced with conflict, what is your initial reaction or response? So, fight or flight, what is your response? And we need to know what our response is. Do you avoid? Do you hide? Do you yell? Do you cry? Do you talk it out with the person right away? Or do you talk about the person right away? Do you do some healthy habits? You journal, or you exercise, you take a walk, you call a close friend. What do you do to deal with the conflict? And sometimes you don't know what's coming, and you need to have good practices, and you need to be able to practice these strategies. As Marianne was speaking about mindfulness, it's important to practice these strategies when you're not being faced with a conflict, when you're at a baseline, so that when you do have a conflict that's just sprung on you, you can fall back on these strategies because you are well practiced with using them. So if you need to count, or you need to breathe, or you need to look around the room and see if you see something, smell something, whatever the strategy is, you want to be practicing them when you're not in conflict, so that, again, when that conflict kind of just happens, you can easily transition to using those strategies. Have you ever been asked what you would do if you had a conflict with a coworker? Why is this question asked so regularly? So we know when we're preparing for an interview, a lot of times this is one of those questions that we have on our list, and we often know the answer to it. Why is it asked so frequently? It's because conflict is inevitable, right? When you put groups of people together, because of their different backgrounds, because of their different culture, because of their different experiences, because of the different experiences on the way to work, even, they're going to react differently. And everybody reacts to conflict differently. So you put all of this together, conflict is inevitable. So what do we want to do? During conflict on school sites, how do we make sure we keep our eye on the prize? How do we make sure we don't let our conflicts get in the way of student success? So that's going to be a challenge, especially in some of those classes where we have a lot of adults. We have a lot of adults coming in and out of the classroom. So we have a lot of adults in special education. We have a lot of adults coming in and out of classrooms. We have a lot of services. So how do we make this all work out? And sometimes we have some issues with general education teachers, and special education teachers. So there's so many things going on a school campus. So how do we make sure that we are still focused on our students when we're having these adult conflicts? We need to remember and continue to reflect on positive student outcomes. And here's what here's what that looks like. So objective number 4, participants will adopt a step-by-step approach to conflict to ensure positive student outcomes. So here we go into our kind of step-by-step approach to help us really continue to be student-centered. So first we have conflict begins. That's our inevitable, right? We have a conflict, it begins. The first thing that we would hope is that you would approach the individual to try and solve it. Conflict continues. Step 2, you would move to a facilitated approach. Step 2A, you would determine main conflict points. Step 2B, you're going to recognize roles and plan agreements. Step 2C, we're going to make sure that what we plan, our agreements, are really going to be supportive for student outcomes. Step 3, we're going to implement our agreements. Step 4, we're going to have facilitated regrouping. And from facilitated regrouping, it could go a lot of different ways. We could have the conflict be solved. We could need some minor adjustments. And then we could go to maintenance. Or we could see that the conflict continues and we need to move on to another facilitated meeting. I know I went through that very fast. That's just an introduction. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper on these next slides. So conflict begins. You want to communicate with your coworker to try to resolve your differences. And I know that can be hard for people, but once you take that initial step back, you do your mindfulness strategies that Marianne talked about, you have a minute to kind of reflect, calm down. You definitely want to approach your coworker with some kind of strategy, or, hey, can we talk? Can we resolve this? You want to do it in a mutually agreed upon time and place. You don't want to just pop up and say, hey, we need to talk about this, because everybody has different timings for becoming ready to talk and ready to solve problems and ready to resolve differences. So you want to make sure that you are in a good place, but also your coworker is in their good place. Conflict continues. You want to choose a facilitator. If things continue, now this is with a group, a team, or it could just be two people. No matter what, if it continues and it's really starting to become a problem, an everyday problem, and it's affecting your work, it's affecting student outcomes, you need to choose a facilitator. A facilitator is someone who comes in with no bias for or against either party and can help lead uncomfortable conversations. So we talked about the job of a facilitator, but an important piece to remember is that the facilitator should be, for this particular situation on an educational site, the facilitator should be somebody that everybody can agree upon. All parties need to agree upon, because it would not be fair if a facilitator came in and has a history with one of the team members. A history meaning a bad history, or they maybe had a falling out, or maybe they went through some kind of issue. So all parties need to definitely be comfortable and agree upon the facilitator. So next, we're going to determine the main conflict points. So the facilitator will meet with the group. They'll ask questions to find the root cause of the problem. Again, we've talked about these meetings and how important it is to have chart paper or a whiteboard for all to view during the meeting. And then once both parties or all the parties contribute, have a consensus of what the main conflict points are, and they will literally be up there written, main conflict points. If everybody agrees, then they can move on to the next pieces of problem solving, which are each person will define their roles in the conflict. After each person has defined and understands their role in the conflict, agreements should be made. Agreements are statements directly related back to the role, and each agreement is a commitment to make the necessary individual changes toward ending the conflict. So we have a visual that might help to kind of understand what we're talking about here. So if one of the participants in the conflict says, my role was this, I agree to do this. My role was, I was being too bossy, so I'm agreeing to ask others for some input. My role was, I Again, the bossy one always comes to mind. So whatever those roles are, across the top, you're going to see my role equals conflict. The agreements on the bottom equals conflict resolution. And they're all tied together. Conflict continues with a facilitator. So again, we want to look at anything that we agree to do. We need to kind of check back and make sure that all of these agreements are related to student outcomes, because we want our students to be the center of what we're doing. That's why we're all there. We're all good people that are trying to be there for our students. Teachers, admin, secretaries, janitors, no matter what your job is on a school campus, you're there because you want to help students grow, learn, and be safe. So this is an example of how you can look and make sure that everything is tied back to student outcomes. So person A says, I agree to check in and make sure everybody understands the lesson plans. So it directly relates back to student outcomes. Person B says whatever their agreements are, does it directly go tie back to student outcomes, yes or no? We're always making sure that whatever our agreements are to solving the conflict, they're directly tied back to student outcomes. After we make agreements, how do we keep them, right? We need a plan. How do we keep our agreements? So implementing agreements is going to be the biggest piece of our problem solving, our conflict resolution. We're going to need to start by really just practicing the changes and making sure that we know that we're doing it every day, that we're setting aside time, that we're being mindful that we're doing it, that we're really taking part in this process. So let's see how that works. We have an agreement accountability check-in sheet. So this is what it looks like. And we have a closer copy. Let's see. Agreement accountability check-in. So the team member can put their name. You could put the date of the initial facilitated meeting. And then you can put whatever your agreement is. Now, this is a self-monitoring tool for each individual of the team. This is not something that needs to be handed in. This is not something that is tied back to any kind of discipline. This is supposed to be supportive to remind you either daily, weekly, monthly, to check in, to do your agreement, to practice your agreement, and to be mindful of those changes that you are working on. So you could use this type of a tool, or you could not use them, whatever works best for the team. And you want to make sure that each team member is okay with using something like this. Or you're not, what I'm trying to say is you're not forcing something like this on them. You would say, does anybody want this agreement accountability check-in sheet to help them? It's not that you would say, you have to complete this. This is just a tool for everybody to help, be accountable, be mindful, be practicing, And it's just a tool. It's supposed to be supportive, not forced. Okay, Mary Ann is going to pop back on, and she's going to go over a scenario to kind of tie it all together and show you how each of the steps actually work with a scenario.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you.
So we have 5 team members here that work in the same classroom. John is the lead paraprofessional. So he's kind of the guy that knows it all. He's been there for a while. We have the teacher, who is Sarah. She's also a new teacher. So she's a little bit green and a little intimidated, but she's definitely knows what she's doing. Esther is another paraprofessional, but she's kind of the timid, vulnerable one. She's easily flustered and not very assertive. We've got Steve, who's a new paraprofessional kind of, but he really needs to be told what to do. He's exciting and fun for the kids, but he's just sort of this cool dude that that just really needs more guidance. The 5th and final person is Mark. He is the assistant principal, and he is going to be the acting facilitator for the conflict that takes place. So Stephen was used to taking direction from John. Sarah asked Stephen, now remember, Sarah's the teacher. She asked Stephen to help a student with an activity. Stephen gave Sarah some pushback, so he kind of didn't really follow her direction. Then John interrupts, and he tells Sarah, this student doesn't like to do pencil and paper work. So now Sarah has become frustrated. She runs and complains to Esther, her little friend, that she doesn't know what to do because John has been working in the same class for 8 years. He touts his knowledge and experience, but he uses that to justify his leading role. So Sarah ends up giving Esther John's responsibilities. John goes to the assistant principal, Mark, to complain, and Mark suggests that John go directly to Sarah and try to resolve this issue together. So John does meet with Sarah. This is not productive because it results in further conflict. There's yelling and arguing, so no progress is being made. So over about a week's time, John and Stephen are noticing that Sarah is gravitating toward Esther, and they're having little private conversations, which can be frustrating in a team environment. So John and Stephen finally confront Esther, and they ask her, what's Sarah been saying to you, and how did you respond to her? So Esther, of course, being the timid, sweet person that she is, she begins to tear up, maybe cry a little, and she gets defensive, saying, I'm just trying to do my job. That's all I want to do. So the tension in the room is progressing over the next few weeks. And so now all 4 staff in the classroom in this program are avoiding each other, and some of them are even calling in sick. So now we've got no consistency, no structure. Everybody's doing their own thing with the students. And this causes huge challenging behavior increases from the students. So now John goes back to the assistant principal and he says, Mark, this is not working. So the assistant principal, Mark, arranges a facilitated approach, which is the meeting with all parties. Okay, so the conflict began. The first step in this whole process is when John goes to the assistant principal, the AP suggests that he go directly to Sarah and try to resolve this together. When John meets with Sarah, this doesn't become productive and there's further conflict and yelling and arguing. So we move on to step 2. So now when John complains to the principal says, okay, we're going to have a meeting. And of course, we want to remind you that with that meeting, the assistant principal is going to arrange to have either a whiteboard or some chart paper with his markers so that someone can take notes and kind of keep documentation of everything that is said in the meeting. As we go on, this is kind of a visual representation of how a facilitated approach looks. We're all going to sit down maybe in the classroom, the library, a private place where we can have this discussion, but it's comfortable for everyone. So now we're in 2A. So we're in the meeting and the assistant principal is now going to go and start eliciting responses from his team as to what are these main conflict points. So Sarah starts and she says, John's undermining my role as the assigned teacher. He interrupts my directions for other aides, and when I tell him to stop, he says he's done this for 8 years. He knows the kids and the program better than I do. Well, then the assistant principal moves on to John. John, can you give me a little bit of background? Well, John says she's trying to change the program completely. She doesn't know the kids like I do, and how this program all this time has provided these children with such success. It's just creating chaos. Well, then when we go to Esther, she doesn't know how to respond because they both complain. She says, if I talk to John, Sarah gets mad. If I talk to Sarah, John gets mad. And I just wish we could all work together and get along. So last but not least is Steve. And our little cool Steve says, hey, I'm new. I just do what I'm told. I know John knows a lot and we get along. So I think I kind of tend to follow his lead. But Sarah's cool. And if she wants me to do something, I'll do it. I just want to do my job. So now that we've recognized what those main conflict points, we are going to actually turn them into what is your role in this conflict? So Sarah admits that she becomes frustrated and shares with Esther, not John. She doesn't go directly to the person with whom she's frustrated. She also has taken away John's responsibilities and gives them to Esther, who's now looking like her favorite. So obviously this is her role in the conflict as well. And then when John tries to talk about it, she gets angry and yells at him. So there's all of Sarah's roles in the conflict. John admits that he's not showing any flexibility. He doesn't like to take direction from anybody. And he went over Sarah's head and went straight to the assistant principal. When he goes to Sarah, though, he actually yells and gets angry. Esther, on the other hand, is intimidated by everyone in the group, and she's confused as to who she should take direction from and where her loyalties should lie. Lastly, Steve says he just follows John's lead. He kind of admits that he takes his side a little bit. He doesn't really give any verbal input during the conflict. And he kind of seems to want to appear uninvolved and blameless. Now that we've got those roles defined, we're going to move on to how are we going to turn my role in the conflict into an agreement, something that I will be practicing once this meeting's over. So Sarah agrees to go directly to the person with whom she's frustrated. She also agrees to allow everyone to keep the responsibilities they started with, and that will actually showcase their strengths. And she also has agreed to meet with her staff regularly to work on team building and the validation of everyone. So they're all validating each other. John agrees to become more flexible and open to change and new ideas. He agrees that Sarah is the teacher of record and will follow her lead. He agrees to work through issues together with the classroom staff instead of complaining first to the administrator. And he agrees to participate actively in the group meetings to team build. Huge growth. Esther agrees to assert her desire to stay out of the conflict between others. She also agrees that Sarah is the teacher of record and Sarah will be the person that she takes direction from. Steve agrees that Sarah's the teacher of record. Yes, she is, and he will take direction from her. He agrees that he's going to give positive feedback to anyone on the team during the school day and agrees on working on a rapport with the two ladies and asks questions of everyone when he's not sure of something that he's being asked to do. So now we want to see, are these agreements that we've agreed to going to result in student outcomes? Sarah's agreements are, number one, she's going to agree to go directly to the person with whom she's frustrated. How does this result in a student outcome? Now the student will not witness adult conflict. They're witnessing positive communication instead. Her second agreement is that she agrees to allow everyone to keep their responsibilities that they started with, which showcases their strengths. So now students, the student outcome is that they will benefit from working with an adult who is working with them from their area of strength. Her last agreement is that she was going to meet with her staff regularly to do team building and validation of each other. How is this going to end up with student outcomes? This means that the students are going to benefit from positive staff morale, positive environment with adults, modeling strong positive work relationships. So as we leave the meeting and we have our agreements listed and how they will tie back to student outcomes, we're going to start practicing these. The reason that Shannon and I really like that agreements check-in is that we all have it written down, so there's nothing forgotten. Everybody's got the same thing written down, their own agreements that match whatever notes were taken by the facilitator. So you can read back and kind of check yourself. Have I been going directly to the person that I'm having a conflict with? Am I allowing people to remain in the responsibilities that they started with? Am I holding those team meetings regularly? And then of course, the rest of the staff are doing the same thing. So you're practicing while always checking in with yourself. So as they implement their agreements, Sarah's team is going to start practicing and implementing their agreements right away. So they're going to choose whether or not they're going to complete an agreement accountability check-in sheet. Like Shannon said, this is an individual tool. It is never to be used for evaluation or anything like that. It is a choice to use to be able to remember what your agreements are. The team may agree to meet weekly or monthly for a set time period with the facilitator to complete the agreement accountability check-in sheet and share out progress. So now they're meeting with Mark, the assistant principal, just to kind of give feedback, and hopefully it's all positive. Remember that every team is unique, so interpersonal relationships are going to be different. Some of the issues that they come to the table with are going to be different. But this tool in every one of these situations is going to support growth and build relationships moving in a positive direction. So again, it's a growth tool. It's a team building tool. It is not an evaluative tool. So this kind of gives you a visual of how this kind of takes place in a flow chart. So when the team meets back for their channel check-in meeting, there's going to be different results depending on the group and the individuals and how well they were able to check in with themselves and keep their agreements. So their facilitated regrouping is that follow-up meeting, even if conflict's solved and we can all go away happy and just really cheer on ourselves for making such growth. There might be some minor adjustments. So maybe we'd say, you know what, let's tweak this a little bit. Sometimes we're being too rigid on everybody doing this. Let's have like a person A, person B. So this is all helping for maintenance of this positive team building activity. If the conflict continues, then we need to come together again and have our facilitated meeting and go back to square one. Let's really get even deeper into what the roles are toward this conflict and how we can turn it around to relate back to student outcomes. In maintenance, the team may choose to do a variety of maintenance procedures and strategies. So if they felt like this was a positive experience, maybe they learned some things about each other that they didn't really know, maybe something that they really liked that they didn't know they would. They might choose to continue to have these meetings maybe regularly, calling it maybe team building time, classroom team meeting, and they can have these weekly, monthly, whatever they feel is most appropriate and doable for their team. So the facilitator doesn't always need to be involved, especially because at maintenance, they've already come to their agreements, they've practiced them, just little tweaks were made. And so now they're really on that positive road, like we do with students, toward independence. And so they can actually do that. And the assistant principal can be proud of, being able to check in with them and give them some validation for how well they were able to come to this positive outcome. So again, he's like your cheerleader. All right, everybody, this is kind of the end, but I'm going to go over our objectives again, just to let you know what we covered. So first of all, we said that you would learn the process of alternative dispute resolution and how it can be used in an IEP in solving everyday conflicts. Then you would acquire mindfulness strategies to solving conflicts and coming to an agreement within a team setting. Also, we promised that you would understand how having knowledge of ADR strategies can be useful in solving everyday conflicts between staff in an education setting. And lastly, we promised that you would adopt a step-by-step approach to conflict to ensure positive student outcomes. Shannon and I would really like to thank you guys for attending again, and we hope that you got a lot out of our breakout session. We really enjoyed putting this together. Shannon?
Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the conference.
Thank you guys. Bye.